Welcome back to another month of Chapter Chat.
So this month we have dived into The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. So for all of you who voted for a fantasy book, this is for you. And I thought it was a pretty quick read. Like once I got into it, I just kind of fell into it, and it was easy to keep going. And then I realized, like, oh man, an hour's gone by.
I'm just going to read a few pages, and then 100 pages later,
Exactly.
we're a quarter of the way through the book. I didn't feel like it was as quick of a read, but also I'm not typically a fantasy fiction reader, so I find it a little bit more of a struggle for me to get into. But overall, I didn't love the book, but I loved what morals the book kind of taught you.
Yes, all of the messages that this author packed in there, I agreed with them wholeheartedly. I do read a lot of fantasy, so I'm a sucker for whimsical, not quite realistic creatures, and the idea that there could be both magic and, kind of magic from the heart that can come out in a story. So I'm a huge fan now and will be reading all of his other books.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the characters.
Excellent.
So some of the characters kind of, you're right, very fantasy, very not so realistic, and interesting in their own ways. We have Chauncey.
And I'm just going to take this moment to say that I am now a Chansey stan everything, Chauncey for bellhop. I fell in love with this little guy, and he was too pure and true for this world. And I just, like, the last half of the book, I was like, if anything bad happens to Chauncey, I'm going to throw it across the room. Nothing does. But
and you can, this is a plug for our Glowforge, make a sticker if
yes.
you'd like as well, downstairs in the makerspace.
If you have a favorite character you need to tell everyone about, you can make a sticker in the makerspace.
So Chauncey, he has tentacles?
Yes. He has tentacles, and he just wants more than anything else in the world to be the best bellhop at a hotel.
And I know that when Linus first arrives, he is taken aback by how quickly his bags sort of disappear, and everyone has to explain Chauncey really
Yes.
wants to be a bellhop.
And when he does take your bags, it's only polite to tip him. So
Every time.
Don't forget.
Let's talk about Sal.
Yes.
Sal can turn into a dog.
A Pomeranian. Yeah. Which I thought was interesting, because normally when you think of shapeshifters, you think of like werewolves. But this is he kind of disappears into all of his clothes as he turns into this tiny dog.
And Fee.
Yes, so Fee was a sprite who is there because she's kind of mentored by Mrs. Chapelwhite, who helps Arthur, who runs this orphanage, and is also...
And sprites, they say, are like more of a dying...
Yeah, like they've been...
Woodlands?
Their numbers are dwindling.
Yes. So far and few in between for sprites. Talia.
The gnome
Is a gnome.
with a beard. She's a female gnome.
She's a female gnome with a beard.
Who has a shovel and threatens to bury everyone.
And she doesn't fit in because most gnomes are all male.
Yes.
That's why she has a beard.
Yes.
That's why she is a misfit, as they coin her. Theodore.
Theodore the Wyvern. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I might not be. But I pictured him as kind of a dragon. He's got wings. He rides around on Sal's shoulder, and he has a hoard of collected items, which notably starts to include Linus's buttons.
And last but not least, Lucy, who I think when they're going over about a quarter of the way through the book, when Linus gets to the island and they start going through everyone, I think out of all of the characters, Lucy catches you off guard the most, but then you also, your heart just wants to just hug Lucy after you meet Lucy and then find out all about
Well, and he's so he's got kind of a dark sense of humor, obviously, given who he is, but still a kid. And kids want to feel, important.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was hilarious because when you meet him, he starts going off about, I'm the Lord of the Dark. And then Arthur is like, and it's your turn to do the dishes. And he's like, oh,
okay.
fine. Runs off to the kitchen, which is like super identifiable.
Which I love. Another thing that we can touch on is how all of these are children.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to relate to a child than it is if all of these were adult characters. So I think,
Sure.
touche on the author's part for having them all be sort of children.
Yes, and we've talked to a bunch of people who read this book over the past couple of weeks, and I know one of our coworkers had said, the first part of the book was kind of slow getting into, and then you meet the kiddos, and it's over from there because they're so wonderful.
They really are. Let's see. So, some other books by this author. I have not read this one yet, but The Extraordinaires.
Yes, and that one is from our young adult section.
Yep. And this one, I've heard by reading some reviews, if you really liked this one, and other works by TJ Klune. One of the reviews I read just said it just keeps getting better. Like every book that he comes out with just keeps getting better. And those are the only two that we have within our whole consortium right now.
But he has a new one that's coming out in September.
So we'll look forward to that one.
Yeah, it's going to be just as nonsensical, but also kind of about found families, which I love.
Who doesn't love a found family? So what shall we go over next?
Well, I grabbed some quotes.
Okay.
And I think the one that stuck out to me the most, that I kept coming back to, is a home isn't always the house we live in, it's also the people we choose to surround ourselves with. So in keeping with that found family sort of idea, but I also thought, I'd grab kind of one of the funnier ones. I think this happens 2 or 3 times in the book where they're going off on an adventure, and Linus is definitely not the adventuring sort, but at some point one of the adults says to Lucy, so the real treasure is the friends we made along the way, and he's just like, you are the worst, which I love because I think everybody has said that at some point. So the real journey, the real treasure, and I thought that was very funny.
And so I guess backtracking a little, this book was more or less about Mr. Parnassus, who is on this island overseeing sort of a shelter, an orphanage for all of these children who didn't fit in anywhere else.
Magical youth.
And he takes them in, and they all live together in one big happy home, which you find out has its trials and tribulations, especially from people in the community who don't view these children or the orphanage in a way that perhaps Linus learns to and Mr. Parnassus does.
Because when you take these kids and you set them aside and the only thing that people know is they're different, often that's something to be scared of. Well, different, is it going to hurt me? Is it going to hurt my family? Is it going to, put my home in jeopardy, which we see kind of play out.
Which we see play out. And with all of that, one of my favorite quotes or paragraphs from the book was playing on that, I guess, about how the community saw these children as a threat or different because they were different than themselves. And he says, I'm frustrated, Mr. Parnassus said. These children are faced with nothing but preconceived notions about who they are, and they grow up to be adults who know only the same. You said it yourself. Lucy wasn't who you expected him to be, which means you already decided in your head what he was. How can we fight prejudice if we do nothing to change it? And so it's true. Without even knowing any of these children, the whole community had already these preconceived notions about who these children were without even taking the time to get to meet them or know them or learn their stories. And so I feel like that was just one of the many morals that we could have picked out from this book.
Yeah, and I think it's a strong argument for kind of changing hearts and minds on an individual level. Like, I know it's overwhelming when you're looking at any type of prejudice to be like, well, it's everywhere. How can I possibly make a difference? But, you know, the kids have to go into the village at some point, and Linus is super nervous. I think even Arthur's nervous. But you kind of get to see how a one-on-one interaction can play out for the better or for the worse. Not to Chauncey, but to some of the other kids have a harder time. And I just thought that that was interesting because we definitely can make a difference in our own sort of circle.
Giving people a chance on an individual level.
Absolutely. So I jotted down a couple of quotes. Not quotes, I'm sorry. I jotted down reviews.
Book reviews. The good, the bad.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
And the ugly, which we do every week, or every
Yes.
month, excuse me.
Every month. And I overwhelmingly saw good reviews. I figured this being an indie next book and doing so well on Goodreads, I mean, like, the majority of people really adored this book. One person called it just a hug in a book, and another one talked about the sheer charm of the text, which I thought was good. I think my favorite one was somebody just wrote, "Now my thoughts are all cerulean." And I thought, you know, when Linus is at work, he has this mouse pad that just kind of asks, "Don't you wish you were here?" And it's, you know, very blue and colorful and island life-esque. And I thought, that's cool. I like that. My thoughts are cerulean too after reading this.
I had, again, I came across a ton of overwhelmingly great ones, so it was hard to choose. But one of them was, "This may be the best book that I read all year. I'm not kidding, this was the most beautiful story I've read in a long time. I laughed, I cried, I smiled, I grinned like a loon. My heart broke and then it filled back with love so much I couldn't breathe," which I think we all felt all of these emotions while reading this. And then it said, "The only sad thing is that," which I think was very similar to the comment from last time. It's the best book that I've read this year, and it's only February.
And now where do you go?
And now we are. And then a bad review. "Too sappy and feel good. I felt like I was watching an episode of Full House. Everything can just be fixed if you talk it out." But
Fair enough.
we can learn something from that as well, talking about our problems.
Yes. I don't think that's bad, although, you know, Full House is not my favorite show. Yeah, for bad and ugly, I think I read a couple that talked about how they thought that it was very cliche. And that the world building wasn't there as much as they wanted it to be, which is something that always gets talked about for sci-fi and fantasy books. Like, you're creating this alternate reality, so you really need to make sure that that's solid. But I felt like with this one, because it's got one foot in our world and then one foot in, you know, whatever this world where magic can exist in a way, it didn't like snap me out of reading the story. I was fine with it, but I also know that I'll forgive a lot of things in the name of good dialogue and good characters, and this book definitely didn't disappoint on those fronts.
Do you think that there's going to be a sequel? Perhaps?
I
Book number
wish
2?
that there was. I hate saying goodbye to characters at the end of a book. I'm a sucker for a series, and so I wouldn't mind one. It doesn't sound like the next one coming out is not. But that doesn't mean
that there might not be. With the very last page, spoiler alert, they introduce a new character for this found family,
Yes.
which maybe alludes to something, a new character developing in their story,
I feel
or
like there's
maybe
like
not.
could be setting up for David to come join their household. And I just think, you know, there was sort of an ongoing story with the mayor of the village, kind of a back and forth between her getting to know them better, and it seemed like they were making an effort to, like, no, we should be out in the village more. We shouldn't separate ourselves because that makes it easier for people to stick to their preconceived notions. Yeah, I would love it if there were a sequel.
So we don't know it just yet, but it did allude to maybe that in the very end,
Yeah.
or just maybe one more happy ending for them,
Which is fine.
which is fine. So we shall see.
Yeah.
So what about, you loved this book.
I did.
What would you recommend for people who also loved this book?
A lot of the reviews I read said, for people who read Harry Potter when they were younger, this is a good book. There were a lot of questions about, can my younger kids read this book? I would say for teens and tweens that it's a fine book for that. If you do have kids of that age, I got kind of a Miss Peregrine's vibe from it. But if you are an adult and you want some other recommendations, if you like found families, there is a book called The Readers of Broken Wheel Recommend. This is the audio, and we have it in print and we have it electronically. This one has no magical creatures. This one is a pen-pal relationship between a woman in Iowa and a woman in Sweden. And the woman in Sweden comes to visit and finds out that her friend has just died. She walks into the funeral, basically. So she's in this small Midwestern town, which is 180 degrees from everything she knows. She doesn't really sure what to do with her life. So they open this bookstore in this town, and kind of realizing that, the community around you sort of, that can be your family, which is delightful. So found families, that's excellent. If you were into the magical creatures, and if you were into the witty dialogue, and if you are into a small child having devilish tendencies, I would definitely recommend Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. You've got an angel and you've got a demon, and their millennia-old relationship that doesn't just characteristics you think would be ascribed to each are, but also not. And then a gang of kids is in this. It's witty and clever and very fun, kind of like this one, and it kind of leaves you with that same sort of optimistic feeling. I did anyway. So I would say that either of those would be good. I will say too, so we do readers advisory videos from the library, also on YouTube. They're called Need to Read or To Read or Not to Read. And I decided that I had so many recommendations I couldn't fit them all in book club. So on Monday there will be a To Read or Not to Read that is like 6 other books that if you liked this one you should check out.
You should also check out. We have a lot of databases here at the library, and one of them is Novelist. And so if you read any book, you can type it in and it comes up with a bunch of like reads.
Yes.
You can even click on it and it goes down the list and it tells you why it's like this. Is it the whimsical characters? Is it the fantasy element? Is it the romance element? And it will rate them and then tell you what parts of it is like. And so I used Novelist. You can access it on our website. And I typed in The House in the Cerulean Sea, and it came up with a list of books. And this is A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. And it is, again, about kind of a curmudgeon, a guy who's a curmudgeon, which we can argue that Linus is very much a curmudgeon before he finds his found family.
Absolutely.
And I think A Man Called Ove is very similar to that, when new people move in next door and maybe help change him a little bit less of a curmudgeon, which I think is very similar to The House in the Cerulean Sea, because Linus at the end, we can argue, is probably not so grumpy anymore.
he allows his heart and his soul to open up a little bit.
Sourdough by Robin Sloan. And if this one doesn't capture your attention with bread, I don't know what will. And this one is about somebody who is a little lost, they're just living their life every day, very monotonous. And then they find their passion, bread. They find a little close-knit family revolving all around bread.
Love it.
And again, it's a found family story, which I think is what all of these recommendations sort of tie into.
Sure.
So you can check those out as well. You want to talk a little bit about Every Heart a Doorway, which also
Sure.
popped up on the list?
So a lot of people, when they were saying, if you like this, you'll like The House in the Cerulean Sea, definitely brought up this series, Every Heart a Doorway. As you can see, the first one is short, so perfect book to kind of check out and see if you like it. Same type of feel, and she has written a ton. And actually, we have a coworker who this is her favorite author.
I think there are 4 in this series, 4 or 5.
Yeah, so
and I was pulling this one off the shelf this morning. I saw all of them.
for someone who doesn't like to say goodbye to people at the end of books, this might be an
Might be the one
excellent
for
next
you.
read for you.
Okay.
So I'm gonna check and see if we have any comments real quick.
I haven't seen any yet, but we've had a lot of people tune in. So
Oh,
good
good.
morning to everyone. I hope you're relaxing and enjoying this edition of Chapter Chat.
On this nice Saturday morning.
Let's answer some questions
yes.
out of our little
I did put some in,
fake fishbowl.
in our jar until we get the real fishbowl. Okay. So I have talked a lot about one of my favorite characters, Chauncey, but did you have a favorite character? Was there anybody that particularly stuck out to you?
You know, I'm gonna go for a whirlwind here. I always like a happy ending for a character, and we start out with Linus, who is very grumpy.
Yeah.
And you just feel so bad for him. Like, he just doesn't seem happy.
Yeah.
He just seems like he's stuck in his little world and just wants something to make him happy, but doesn't have it.
Well, they give you little flashbacks about stuff his mom says, and you're just like, oh, Linus.
But at the very end, even that last chapter, you can find out, you see that he truly is happy.
Yeah.
He finds love, he finds a family, and you just kind of,
He finds purpose,
he
too.
does. He
Like,
loves what he's doing, and
Yeah.
before it was his job, and that's what he did, and I'm a social worker, caseworker, but
don't get attached
Yeah.
to anything ever.
that I must do. But he finds his true purpose out in the garden. I believe he was in the garden at the very end,
I
helping
think
out.
so.
Um,
I think so.
But I don't know, I kind of liked him. I liked
Yeah.
how his character evolved from start to finish, and we all love a good character in a book. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna go with Linus.
Excellent choice. He was very heartwarming to watch his evolution. Yes,
Yeah.
just kind of being able to open up.
Because he too had some preconceived
Yeah.
notions when he received all of their files at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yes. Well, things on paper very different than other
Judging a
things.
book by its cover, which, I mean, this book has an amazing cover.
It's a beautiful cover.
Beautiful cover.
It's very serene. When you were a kid, did you ever want to have magical powers?
I always wished I could fly. You see birds up there and you look up, and I wish, not as magical, but I guess magical.
That's not, I mean, we can't do it now.
No, it's
so-
not. Yeah, I wish I could fly.
Yeah. I always wanted to be able to like be a master of disguise. So I don't know if
Like
that's
be invisible or just
like being able to change
Okay.
what you looked like,
Mhm.
like just on a whim.
just
Yeah, like not for any nefarious purposes, just because, I don't know, I think it would be fun to be able to do that whenever you wanted.
I think that would be a very good choice.
Oh, and I think this last one has to do with whether this was a series. Oh, but I did write down the title of the next one that comes out, which is good because I could not think of it. It's called Under the Whispering Door, and it has to do with someone who dies and the Reaper comes to collect him, but instead of kind of taking him across to whatever lies beyond, they take him to a small village. And in that village, he kind of has to realize who he is and what does it mean to live your life. He's given like a week to kind of get it together because that's when you're crossing over, and he's got to kind of realize what does it mean to truly live your life. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, and like I said, when I was looking at book reviews, a lot of people this was our first time seeing this author, and we were looking for different fantasy fiction books on Goodreads. It was one of the most anticipated ones of 2020, it sounded like. But a lot of people said that they didn't think that this author could keep drawing them in after reading, but every book that he has come out with, they just fall more and more in love with him. And one person even said it was like, they are now, TJ Klune is one of their most anticipated authors for book releases. And so, yeah, I mean, again, I didn't love it, but I also don't love fantasy fiction.
Yeah.
But I do think that this book has great elements in it for just a feel-good book.
Yeah, and in a world where I feel like I like dark and gritty, like I read psychological thrillers, I read Game of Thrones, I like a dark and gritty, city with an underbelly type of thing, but I don't think everything needs to be that, and I know I kind of get tired when everything is pitched that way. So this was a really nice bright spot to read. So what are we reading next month?
This is exciting, and I actually just started it on my car ride this morning. I'm an audiobook listener, which reminds me, this book, in case you haven't read it and you're really intrigued after this chapter chat, we have an audiobook version on Libby and Overdrive ebook. We have, I think, 5 copies here.
Yeah, so
in print.
Whatever your preferred reading method is, we got you covered.
And same with this next book. We already have some audiobook versions, ebook versions, print here. We are going to read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book was also on the list of highly anticipated for this year, last year. I started it on my car ride, and I'm already into it. Addie LaRue just spans over centuries. And in fact, if you read it, it just says that no one ever remembers who she is until one day somebody remembers her name. And so I do like time traveling. I also love The Time Traveler's Life. I think if I'm going to have a fantasy element, I think I can really get into time travel, which is also could be a really great magical power to be able to span across centuries.
For sure.
And I'm really excited about it. It also has elements of historical fiction because she's traveling throughout so many different generations. It's got some romance in there, and so I'm really excited about reading this book.
I'm excited about the historical aspect of it. I think
yeah.
that is something I enjoy, and excellent reviews on this one as well. I'm excited.
I'm very excited, and this one will be the second Saturday of June,
which is the 12th.
At 9 a.m. It'll be on Facebook Live, and if you cannot join us live, it will also be on YouTube. It will be on Instagram, IGTV. You can also rewatch it on Facebook. That gets posted to it after.
So whatever your preferred social media, we've got you covered there too.
And again, it's on audiobook, ebook, print.
Yes. Multiple copies.
Multiple different copies.
So if you're interested,
yeah,
come on down. we'll hook you up.
And if you ever have any recommendations for what we do in perhaps July or August or September, drop us a comment below. Write to us, email us, call in. We'd be happy to look into any recommendations that you have for future chapter chat reads.
Absolutely. Even if it's just, I really like this style of book, or even an author, like we're open to suggestions.
Absolutely.
We want this to be something that you guys enjoy. So let us know what type of stuff you want to read.
All right. Is there anything else that we need to go over today? I think
covered everything on my little stand here.
I love this letterboard. Remember, you're not alone. That is such a good part of this whole book.
Try to pick out a theme that kind of reoccurs, and I think that's a good one, especially for this month. So.
All right. Well, if we have nothing else left, we will see you in June.
Yes.
To talk about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Check it out. Get your copy now, and then join us in June with any questions that you may have.
Have a good month, guys. We will see you next time.